Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another edition of Adam's Music Box. Well, military music is sometimes, quite oftentimes, dismissed as being music merely for utility with little or no lasting artistic value. In some cases, this may well be true, but many great nations, especially those with large militaries, historically have very much a profound musical tradition when it comes to military bands. And indeed, many bands that are in schools and in other educational facilities are modeled after military bands. But today I want to talk about the most famous military music ensemble in the history of the modern world, and that's the Alexandrov Ensemble, sometimes referred to by its informal but widely used name, Red Army Choir. This military music band and choir has toured the world more than any other military band or military choir in history. And today I want to try to understand why. So this ensemble was formed by Alexander Vasilievich Alexandrov in the early part of the Soviet Union, and it quickly became a prominent source of morale for the troops fighting the Great Patriotic War, the war that the Soviet Union fought in the 40s as part of the wider Second World War. But the music was more than just something to raise morale, even though it very much did that, which is a major component of any military music. What made this music very special was a combination of modern military themes and traditional ancient Russian folk music, and indeed some of the other folk musics within the wider Soviet space and former Russian Empire. This was really something that owed a lot to the Russian classical tradition, which in a formal sense was started by Mikhail Glinka in the early 19th century. At its root, Russians have always been very open in terms of composition to modern instrumentation and modern ideas about orchestration. This is likely because Russia came to the idea of the modern orchestra much later than, let's say, the Germanic cultures, the Italic cultures, France, England, Scotland, even many of the Nordic cultures. And the main reason for this is that, unlike the church music of all of those other countries, which are either majority Roman Catholic or majority Protestant, as a majority Orthodox nation, Orthodox church music is all choir. There's no instrumentation. We mentioned this just the other day. And so when secular Russian musicians like Glinka began composing modern orchestral music, they really went full bore for modern. The lost country to adopt the latest technology adopts the latest version. That's why in Africa, you have an entire payment infrastructure based around the mobile phone, because you didn't have to worry about excessive cables and telephone lines and telegraph lines the way that countries that industrialized much more early did. So there are some advantages to being late to the party. And Russia, as a country whose musical culture was late to the orchestral party, really adopted a lot of modern techniques. And Mr. Alexandrov very much fit that mold with his approach to military and choir music. He took very modern ideas of composition and instrumentation, but married them to folkish traditions, ancient traditions. And he wasn't afraid to incorporate instruments that were of the modern period, the 20th century, with traditional Russian instruments. You see balalaika and a lot of instruments derived from that playing in the choir. You'll also see accordion, which, at least in most Western European and North American military traditions, tends to be absent. In Central Europe, it varies a bit. But the overall sound was very unique. And when you mix the sound of the military band with the very distinctive voices of the Russian choral school, you get a sound unlike any other. And far from just writing music to march to, that was sort of the least of Alexander Alexandrov's composition. Most of them were songs that were really like pop songs. They obviously had to have a patriotic or a militant message, but many, Kalinka, Katusha, the list goes on, these are types of music that were either written or arranged in some cases by Alexandrov, certainly promoted by him. And the entire idea was to create something that people could sing along to, hum along to. And so, in terms of his arrangement, performance, and composition, he really accomplished all of that. He died shortly after the war, but his son became his successor, Boris Alexandrov, and he continued his father's tradition well into the 1980s. He died in the 90s, but by then the choir was not only a national institution, but an internationally beloved institution that still tours the world and makes recordings to this day. And so if there's a moral to this story, a lesson to be learned, if you're making military music, which is generally very narrow and nationalistic, why not make something that the entire world can also enjoy? And in that sense, isn't very narrow because it's musically rich. And while nationalistic in its origins, it has international appeal. Not many military composers, military conductors, military arrangers accomplish that, but father and son Alexandrov certainly did so. And of course, today is the 9th of May, which is the most important day in the secular Russian calendar. And so if you look at Russian stuff on YouTube or Rumble or any social media, you'll probably hear some of this music and you might recognize it because a lot of it has been used in Western movies and television because it's very, very distinct and evocative, making it unique for its genre. And in many ways, one could argue that the Alexandrov Choir, the Red Army Choir, was in fact a genre in and of itself. Like, subscribe. We will see you next time. Take care.